you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk. So, guys, we're going to revisit the Nick Reiner case right now. And again, that's if you guys aren't familiar with this case, which most likely everyone seems to be, it's the murder of Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Reiner, by their son, Nick Reiner. That's at least what the discussions are. And at this point, the dialogue has shifted into whether Nick Reiner has mental health issues, addiction, or question his own self-worth in his family. I mean, there's a whole mess of things that's being tossed around TMZ. I feel like it's more of a defense. It's like they're creating a narrative by emotion before the court can really come through with what's actual factual. I see a lot of stuff being put out by TMZ. It seems to be creating this narrative that I'm thinking is leaning towards not guilty by insanity. And I was going to break down a couple of videos that I watched, especially one with Harvey Levin from TMZ talking about why this should be an insanity plea as if he's a mental health professional. And then obviously I've seen stuff from defense lawyers as well, including his partner Geragos on his own show called Reasonable Doubt, I believe is the name of it. I thought instead of reacting, even though we'll discuss it briefly, we'll let the script that we have to come like that we're going to go over kind of be a little bit more natural. I don't want to feel like we're reacting to what they're saying, because if we do that, we'll actually limit a lot of what needs to come out. Because as I've been doing my research, especially after talking to you, Denise, there's a lot more here. And what the media is really tossing out there, I feel, is just an argument for his defense, but it's really not based on anything that will truly hold weight once you get through to the court system. But out of curiosity, Denise, if you don't mind, first, I was wondering if you could introduce yourself, and then we'll kind of go into the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Denise Schonwald. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I'm a family mediator, and I'm also a former critical care nurse.
Yes, and we love having you on as always.
Thank you.
So real quick, I do have about 10 questions I want to send you away, but I have a lot of context here that I want to send out because there was a lot of learning here because, again, I'm not a mental health expert. I may have a degree in psychology, but I'm not nearly as highly educated as you are, or have I practiced it. But I do want to ask you first, what you're seeing on the media. I mean, yes, TMZ, Reasonable Suspicion, all these different shows that are trying to cover this mental health angle or the addiction or his questions of self-worth. I mean, is this, in your mind, really going to apply to basically in legal standing a no guilty by insanity ruling?
It could. It's interesting. When the case first broke, I remembered a couple cases that I had, and I was thinking, I wonder if Nick had some schizophrenia, particularly paranoid schizophrenia, because those are the conditions that I see where people will commit some violent acts. And if that's the case, and if that's been proven, that could certainly get him acquitted or not acquitted, but the reason by insanity, verdict.
Now, so I've been doing some research, and this is what the research is showing me, is that it really matters what happened in the heat of that moment. That's really key. So the first question I want to touch on, and I'll just provide some context here, is, so first, the Nick Reiner case has generated significant public attention, much of it focused on questions of mental health, addiction, and potential legal defenses. As someone who spent years working in corrections and now investigates criminal cases through Tear Talk, I've seen how easily media narratives can conflate mental illness with legal insanity, and how dangerous that conflation can be for public understanding, victim advocacy, and the integrity of the justice system. I mean, I just did a show yesterday with an older woman. She was older, about 65, stabbed in the back of the Barnes and Nobles. The gentleman is homeless, but they claim that he has mental health concerns. Then you got the Ashley Buzzard case where the mother pretty much executed her 9-year-old daughter, and there's going to be concerns about her mental health. And I feel like right now it's being tossed out more as an excuse or a defense strategy. And my problem is when these get tossed into the media, into all these outlets, and it gets released to the public, it paints a narrative that really may not be consistent with what the courts will find out later on once things get revealed, how they should be revealed through courts. So this analysis today will break down the clinical, legal, and evidentiary standards that actually apply when someone raises mental health as a potential defense. It's designed to help audiences and investigators separate fact from speculation, compassion from excuse making, that's key, and legitimate mental health considerations from post hoc justifications for violence. So the first section I have, and I'll just kind of ask you to bear with me with each section, then you can go in all deep on each section. I'm going to do one section and ask you the question, then please explore what I've sent out. Love your thoughts on it. But take your time, because what I have to read may take about 2 minutes. But I had to learn a lot about this, because it's funny, because I just want to mention something. What's being painted in the media, if you don't really look into it and you take it at value, at face value, it does automatically lean towards compassion and sympathy. But for someone like me, I felt conflict with that. So I wanted to go a little bit deeper. And then when you go deeper and get into the nuts and bolts or the meat of the discussion, it's not so surface. It's not so what's being tossed at your face, but rather a bit different and actually a lot more complex. So I think the media is trying to simplify an insanity plea based on things that may not even be relevant when it comes to being heard in the court. So the first section I got is what an insanity plea would actually require in the Nick Reiner case. So here's the legal standard from what I found. An insanity plea is not about whether someone has ever struggled with mental illness, had a difficult upbringing, or experienced psychological distress. It is exclusively about whether at the exact moment of the alleged act, the defendant was so severely mentally impaired that they either, one, did not understand the nature and quality of what they were doing, or two, did not understand that what they were doing was wrong. This is the standard used in most U.S. jurisdictions, including California, which follows a version of, I learn things new all the time, of the McNaughton Rule established in 1843. So I want to give a little bit about the McNaughton Rule.
Okay.
The McNaughton Rule is one of the oldest and most influential legal standards for insanity, established in 1843 in England, and it still shapes how insanity pleas work today, including in many U.S. states. What the McNaughton Rule is the McNaughton Rule sets the legal test for when a defendant can be found not guilty by reason of insanity. Under this rule, a defendant is legally insane only if, at the time of the act, they were suffering from a mental disease or defect that caused them to A, not understand the nature and quality of what they were doing, or B, not understand that what they were doing was wrong. They don't have to meet both. It just could be one or the other, but usually A, not understanding the nature and quality of what they were doing. That's usually the foundational element. If the defendant knew what they were doing and knew it was wrong, they are legally sane even if they have a serious mental illness. So why was this created in 1843? Just a little backdrop. The rule comes from the case of Daniel McNaughton, who was suffering from severe paranoid delusions, believed the government was persecuting him, and killed the British Prime Minister's secretary, thinking he was the Prime Minister. The court found McNaughton not guilty by reason of insanity, which caused public outrage. So in response, judges created a strict standard so insanity defenses wouldn't be abused. That standard became the McNaughton Rule. So why it matters today, the McNaughton Rule is intentionally narrow. It does not ask, was the person mentally ill? Was their judgment impaired? Were they emotionally distressed? Were they traumatized or addicted? It asked only, did they know what they were doing? And did they know it was wrong? That's why insanity pleas are rare and difficult to win. Many people think insanity means they couldn't control themselves. Under the McNaughton Rule, that does not matter. Loss of impulse control, emotional overwhelm, loss of impulse control, be emotionally overwhelmed, addiction, or poor judgment do not qualify unless they eliminate understanding of reality or wrongfulness. So the McNaughton Rule doesn't ask whether someone was mentally ill. It asks whether they knew what they were doing and knew it was wrong. So I just want to apply it here, and then I have a question. And thank you so much for your patience.
Sure.
In a case like Nick Reiner's, involving the alleged murder of his parents, prosecutors would face an insanity defense only if the defense could prove with credible expert testimony and I hate this word, contemporaneous evidence that at the time of the killings, Nick was experiencing such a severe psychotic break that he could not comprehend that he was attacking human beings or could not understand that killing people was morally and legally wrong. This is an extraordinarily high bar, and most insanity pleas fail even when the defendant has a documented history of serious mental illness. So again, how does this apply to this modern case? It's the last part. In cases like Nick Reiner's, media discussion of mental illness, addiction, medication changes, emotional distress does not automatically support an insanity plea. The legal focus stays on awareness, understanding, wrongfulness, and behavior during and after the act. According to Department of Justice statistics, insanity pleas are raised in less than 1% of felony cases, and they succeed in about 25% of those cases. That means roughly 0.25, 25% of felony defendants are found not guilty by reason of insanity. So again, that's a quarter of 1%. Mm-hmm. The reason courts require proof of complete detachment from reality at the moment of the crime, not before, not after, but during. A diagnosis of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, PTSD, or addiction does not by itself meet this standard. So the first question, a lot there, that one's the biggest category, biggest section. So I appreciate your time. Question one. So, and please take all the time in the world to explore this because I just put a lot on the table there. Question one, what would an insanity plea actually require in a case like this?
Well, one of the things that I was thinking about when you were sort of describing the history and the cases, let's think about something traumatic or when our emotions are heightened, like maybe a building is burning down and somebody runs into a burning building to grab a couple people. And you may interview that person and say, what were you thinking? And they go, well, I wasn't thinking. I just ran in there, even knowing that the building was on fire and I just wanted to get the people out. In that case, we would consider that person a hero. We would think, oh, that's amazing. You were so selfless. But what happens is they actually disassociate. They sort of forget about, why this is probably not a good idea. And they just go on instincts or what comes, naturally to them in that moment. In a case like in a mental illness like schizophrenia, they have difficulty differentiating reality from not. And, with the Reiners, we know that there is a very violent history. Nick was known to be violent. He had a very contentious relationship with his parents at times. And sometimes with schizophrenia, they actually, project all of their frustrations onto someone that they love. In this case, if after this violent act was done, you have to look at the history and see what potentiated it. And in his case, he had substance abuse, and it looks like maybe some underlying schizophrenia, some sort of mental illness. And then the perfect storm came upon, and all of a sudden this egregious act was, happened.
Right. And then I want to mention something. So me and Russ had a discussion on this, guys, and I would definitely recommend you watch this. It's one of the videos where we have the drawing, the cover, the thumbnail of that is going to be the cover. It's a drawing of Nick Reiner in the suicide smock. And one of the things that we were discussing in that was if you go by this legal standard of what insanity is, because that really is, I guess, a legal word. If this all happened within the timeline that's being suggested, again, we only know what's being sent our way. However official, unofficial it is. There's an interaction at the Conan O'Brien party. We get that. Something negative happens, and then eventually the rumor is they wind up going home soon after. Fine. The only people that know what happens in that moment is going to be Nick and obviously the other two, Michelle and Rob are no longer with us. But with that said, if he would have went home and let's say went to his room in the guest house, whatever it was, he in this time he could have either premeditated, or further decompensated.
Yes, and fantasized about all of this because
That's the question. So like if we were the defense or the prosecution, you would have to assume that a big part of the discussion will probably be in that window, right?
Yes. And how can you do something, it didn't look like there was any sort of struggle or anything. So this had to be something that was somewhat planned out so that it could be executed without, that a lot of time, because it doesn't even look like there was a struggle.
Right. And it looks like there's a lot of things that were planned out, maybe checking in a hotel room before it happened so we can have an alibi and say he was there.
Yeah.
So
there was a lot of planning.
Right. Now, the funny thing is, if the prosecution wants, this is where it's crazy because the narrative that's being painted out by the media, which I believe is coming from the defense, to be honest with you, those are the sources that are closest to the case. And we'll get to that. But I believe that's painted by the defense. They're going to try to put a narrative out there that's going to build sympathy and compassion. Basically, it's going to kind of move away from the legal side of things and really push on the heartstrings of individuals. So they're going to try to paint that picture. The prosecution may lean on before and after because they don't really know what happened in the middle, but they're going to show some afterthought and whatever it is. They're going to show, probably more importantly, the premeditation. I think that's going to be extremely important.
There's always a history to anything.
Right. And I think both sides are going to find their greatest conflict in the middle when the incident occurred. Because if I'm the prosecution, I know I'm going to be very limited in what happened during that moment because the only person that can know that is going to be Nick because the other two people are dead. So I really can't stay focused too much on that. So I have to bring out context and whatever circumstantial evidence I got, right? I think the defense is going to want to paint the sympathy, which they're doing now, in order to bias that middle. Does that make sense? Do you feel that?
The autopsy will also be very helpful. Like was there a lot of cortisol in the body? And cortisol is something that we release when we have stress. There's going to be a lot of understanding because, autopsies tell a wonderful history too. Whether there were substances involved, whether there was stress involved, whether there's a struggle. So that will be very helpful to the prosecutor also.
Yeah, and I have that one of my later questions. We'll talk about addiction and stuff like that because I know that plays in a role because people look at that as behaviors of choice, regardless of whatever the outcome is. But so before we go again to the next part of the question, I just want to make sure the one thing that's not really being discussed, and me and Russ did touch on it last time. I would recommend you guys check out that video, but also just to kind of keep it out here now with me and Denise now is that moment when it happened is what matters the most. And the problem is one side not knowing that there's not, because remember, you have the side of law enforcement, the side that's trying to hold accountability, which is going to try to be as factual as possible because that's how they roll. So they're going to know that they're not going to have enough in that section to prove, or in that moment. So they're going to lean on everything around it to try to hope it paints a picture of a possibility. But the other side is going to corrupt that a bit and challenge that possibility, which winds up what they're going to wind up doing is they're going to kind of push and say it doesn't matter what happened before or after what happened in the moment. If I was the prosecution, you can't prove what happened in the moment. Yeah, well, I got what Nick is telling me right now.
Yeah, but you can prove whether there was a struggle. I mean, you know what I mean? Like what did the room look like? I mean, there's a lot of things that we look for that we don't necessarily need somebody to testify. We just need to sort of put all the pieces together.
Right. So if Nick obviously admits, I don't think they're questioning the fact that he did it or not.
Right.
I mean, most of the media, as I said, getting their stuff from the defense attorney. So most of the arguments I see right now are just, he's got mental health concerns, got addiction, whatever it is. I mean, it's very hard, I think, as law enforcement to be able to look at a scene and really isolate that scene from before and after. Just look at the crime scene where it happened and make a determination if what happened was something uncontrolled, something that couldn't be prevented, something that would fall into someone who lost their sense of reality, because you would need the before and after to build context. You need all that. Like, did he have a knife on him? Did he take a knife from the kitchen? I mean, you would need everything that show that this wasn't just built on impulse, but rather it was planned when he was in his guest room the whole time. That's what I'm.
If I had to speculate, I would say it was premeditated and planned.
Me too. 100% me too. And I have a feeling if I was the defense, I would want us to stay focused in that moment of ambiguity. And I would fight against anything that could be introduced that, in my mind, would bias what happened in the moment. And I think the prosecution would have to say, no, can't do that. We got to allow for before and after, because it paints a picture of who we are dealing with in the moment. Because as you watch the stuff on the news, a lot of them are not focusing on before or after. They're trying just to focus on his mental well-being, his addictions, all this other stuff. So again, just for that first section, I think it's what happened in the middle. And I think that's good. What happened in the exact incident, I think that's going to be a big bulk of where this case is going to end up, in my opinion.
Yeah. And it looks like, from what we know, that neither one of them struggled.
Yeah, because he either could have snuck attacked them, while they were sleeping.
That's what I think. That's what I'm guessing. I'm certainly, it's all speculative, but
yeah. And you know what's funny? No, but you know what's funny? Let's say that is the case, because here's what happened yesterday. So I did a video yesterday about a woman that was killed at a Barnes & Noble's. Horrible situation. Be real quick about it. She reading a magazine, just enjoying some time around the holidays, and just a random guy, Antonio Moore, I think his name, just runs up behind her, puts a knife in her back, and then she falls out. He runs out. So he already had a knife on him, by the way. He runs out to the woods and basically said the pressure was getting to him, and it was fight or flight, and basically she happened to be the nearest person. And of course, this guy has a mental health history. She calls her, she finds a way to call her husband, says she was attacked, but she eventually dies in the hospital. So she doesn't make it. And now there's going to be this whole mental health concern, whatever it is. But you made a good point. The prosecution in this case, for the case of the Barnes & Nobles, they're going to say premeditated, because even though it was impulsive, or it looks like it's impulsive, he left the knife there, ran out right away. But he mentioned things like fight or flight. I felt the pressure coming on. It was either her or somebody else. So there's some thought there. So it doesn't have to be a day or two in advance. It could be a second to correct it.
Yeah.
A second to not do any. A second to stop yourself from doing something. So that, and I say that all to say, because in this case here, that's all the prosecutor kind of has to go for, is a second where, you knew what you were doing was wrong. And I do think, I don't know if this makes sense or not, but if they both were, let's say, sleeping in their bed or whatnot, or he did it in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. when everybody's quiet and they know that they were going to be asleep, that's a bit strategic.
Absolutely. And I will tell you, normally with couples, when something's going on with one of them, the other one wakes up and wants to know what's going on. Like, are you okay? You need anything? Yeah, whatever. We check in with each other. Yep. I think it happened so quickly. I don't think either one of them had any understanding of what was happening until it was too late.
Yeah. So I agree with you, Denise. And if they don't allow the beginning part, I mean, I'm sure the prosecution should be allowed to present that, but if they want to focus in the middle, I think you could mess with a little bit with the time, the fact that they were in their bed, how he did it, which I'm sure will matter.
Yep.
So now it
what
comes
the room looked like. What the room looked like. What was it messed up? What did there seem to be a struggle? I mean,
because you're right, because that means he's, now when you say the struggle, that means he stayed with it, right?
Right. He woke up and, maybe the lamp was knocked over, or, like when you wake up, particularly out of sleep, you're sort of flailing and so forth. Right. I'll tell you, when I do family therapy, and so a family comes in that I've never met before, and they all sit down and I'm looking around, I just by looking at them and watching and observing, even for like 5 minutes or 2 minutes, I can already have a good understanding of what's going on. So go ahead.
No, I never mean to cut. I apologize, guys. I don't. She could talk. It's just that she usually very quick with her points, and if I hear her take a breath, I figure I could fill it in. But if you have a thought, cut me back. Say I'm not done, because I don't want people to. That's on me. But you had another thought, and I apologize.
I was just going to say, and going into these crime scenes, I know we were like, oh, what happened in the exact moment? But there's a lot that you can gather just by looking around and understanding and looking at the body and so forth. Just that's sort of like basing off my nursing skills too.
Right. So what I wanted to ask was on top of that was when I mentioned the struggle, if you have someone that's going through a mental health break, or I don't want to say a moment of insanity here, let's say, and there is a struggle, and obviously the struggle, it keeps them more invested in the moment. Is there a chance when someone goes to fight back that there's a chance that could spook them a bit, or they just actually could just continue to aggravate them?
The cases that I've seen, when all of a sudden somebody sort of snaps, as you will, it's so violent and it's so quick that the other person really can't fight back.
Ah, interesting.
Mm-hmm. I had a case years ago where it was the son. He was diagnosed schizophrenic in college, and he showed up at the parents' house, and the mom opened the door, and he had like a hatchet, and so she just opened the door, and he didn't kill her. She was in a coma for 3 months, but he sort of chopped off her finger. He put the hatchet in her. I mean, it was just really gruesome and violent. But later on, when I met with her, she said, she didn't even defend herself. It was so quick and it was so violent that she was basically, she didn't have a chance.
So I wanted to say, before we get into the second question, I wanted to say when they did that law, the McNaughton rule, I don't know if it's a law, but the McNaughton rule, I wanted to know if you needed both or only one, and it says you only need one. And I asked, well, probably be one of the two. Only one of two components has to be met for a legal insanity finding. So at the time of the act, because of mental disease or defect, the person either did not understand the nature and quality of what they were doing, so meaning they didn't comprehend what the act actually was. For example, not understanding they were harming a human being, maybe. Mm-hmm. Or the second component is, if you need it, or just two components, did not understand that what they were doing was wrong, meaning they may have understood the act itself, but generally believed it was morally or legally justified due to a psychotic delusion. So the important clarification is the person does not have to meet both conditions. One is enough. Mental illness alone is not sufficient. Loss of control, rage, intoxication, or emotional overwhelm do not qualify, and the impairment must exist at the exact moment of the act. So one of the things it said here, what I said just out of that first part, the person, the first prong asked whether the person understood the nature and quality of the act. So the question is, did they understand what they were physically doing and what it meant in reality? So if someone fails this prong, it usually means they didn't understand they were harming a human being, they didn't understand the act would cause death, or they were completely detached from reality, like severe psychosis, profound delusion, like they were being commanded orders or something. The level of impairment is rare and usually very obvious. When it's met, insanity is almost automatic because you can't judge right versus wrong if you don't understand what's happening at all. That's why that first part feels a bit foundational. It goes to basic reality testing. But here's the nuance. Legally, the second prong exists precisely because someone can understand the act, yet still be insane. The second prong covers situations where the person understood they were killing someone, but due to psychotic delusion, believed the act was morally required, commanded, or justified. So an example is believing God ordered the killing, or believing the victim was an evil force that had to be destroyed. In those cases, the person understands the act, but does not understand its wrongfulness. So why courts treat them as equals? The law treats both prongs equally because prong number one equals no understanding of reality. Prong number two equals distorted understanding of morality due to psychosis. Both represent a mind that is not functioning in a legally responsible way. So why most cases fail both prongs? Most defendants understand what they're doing, understand it's wrong, may feel overwhelmed, angry, intoxicated, emotionally distressed, but not psychotic. And that's why insanity pleas fail so often. The first prong goes to whether someone understood reality at all, And the second recognizes that someone can understand the act but still be legally insane if psychosis made them believe it was right. What's your thoughts on that? There's a lot there, but does that make sense?
Yeah, but one of the things that I like that you mentioned is why get a hotel room check into a hotel room the night before? I mean, you could see like at the time where maybe he disassociated, he was delusional, somebody told him to do it in his mind or whatever. But then why do all this stuff beforehand so that he had a place to go? That to me makes me think it's premeditated, and that makes the insanity plea a little bit weak, that I think.
Right. And I feel they may know that. So I think that all this stuff in the media right now, to be honest with you, is pushing away from that legal sense and moving towards sympathy and compassion, hoping that they'll find one juror. I only got to find one.
Yeah.
So I want to go to diagnosis. This is second section. Diagnosis versus mental state at the time of the offense, the critical distinction. This is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of criminal mental health evaluations. A psychiatric diagnosis does not automatically speak to what was happening in a person's mind at a specific moment in time. Someone can have a formal diagnosis of schizophrenia, a history of hospitalizations, documented delusions or hallucinations, and a pattern of erratic behavior, and still be legally sane at the same time they commit a violent act. What courts actually examine, forensic, like you actually mentioned this, but forensic evaluators and courts focus on mental state during the criminal act. Was the person experienced active psychosis, command hallucinations, or delusional thinking that prevented them from understanding their actions? Awareness of the act. Did they know they were harming another person? Perception of reality. Were they responding to something objectively real or to a hallucination or delusion? An ability to distinguish right from wrong, even if psychotic. Did they understand their actions were illegal or moral? And why this matters for the, or immoral, sorry. Why does this matter for the Reiner case? So if Nick Reiner had a mental health diagnosis, whether depression, addiction, or something else, it tells us he may have been struggling, but it does not tell us whether on the night his parents were killed, he was incapable of understanding what he was doing or that it was wrong. That's a separate, much more rigorous inquiry that requires direct psychiatric evaluation, review of medical and treatment records, interviews with family, friends, and clinicians, analysis of behaviors before, during, and after the incident, and toxicology and substance use history. So the question here is, how does a diagnosis differ from the mental state at the time of the offense?
Well, the other thing that I was thinking when you were reading all that, he was at 17 rehab places. I mean, there's a lot of documentation about him. And there were probably many psychiatrists that saw him. There were probably many psychologists that evaluated him. He was probably on a lot of medications. I mean, there's a lot there, and the prosecutors got a lot to build on. The defense is hoping that people feel sorry for him, but it's going to be really hard because I think a lot of the evidence is stacked against him.
Right. So I was wondering. So it's a unique question here, but if the defense was to push that they want to focus more on the moment because they know that's kind of where the ambiguity is. Yeah. So why not push there? And then they can go ahead and use all this to provide the context of that moment. And the prosecution doesn't have that, or they're not probably going to use that. They're going to use more of what would be strategic, stuff that showcases some afterthought, whatever it is. I would feel if one side tries to discount the other, they both could say, then we're both wrong. If you want me not to showcase something that can bias that moment, then I think the prosecution may want to say, well, then all this other stuff really doesn't matter in the moment then for me either, because how can we honestly prove right now that he would meet this level of the not guilty plea for the sake of insanity? Because I mean, be honest with you, unless you were there in that moment, and you're not able to use any context, how do you prove it either way?
Yeah. And what you mentioned before, a lot of people have schizophrenia, anxiety, depression, and so forth, and they don't commit violent crimes. So I mean, you can't say that they caused him to do it. It certainly didn't help. But
right. So could a prosecutor fairly say, hey, listen, guys, I feel that if we keep on pushing that he has these diagnoses, is that's going to bias whatever happened in that moment. So could they also push and say, guys, I'll have an expert come on right now that works specifically with people with schizophrenia, and they'll tell you how a lot of them are not violent.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But as you know, sometimes you can present perfect evidence and somebody doesn't quite get it. So, you're right. You just take one juror to say, well, maybe that wasn't true, or, maybe we should have thought about this. And it's going to be tough.
That's all they need.
That's it. One person to see it differently.
If the family comes in and winds up siding with Nick, you're going to get a lot more jurors. I'm going to tell you that right now.
Yeah.
And my big thing is this too, and this is what I wind up doing a show on this, or actually, you know what? Look, I think this, I don't know if you got a chance to see this, but I think this would make sense to you. I want to show you something. I think it's this one, right? Mental health or media framing. If I may.
Yeah, that's okay. Do it.
Yeah, check this out. And I think this is actually, you know what? Let me do this. I'm not going to get a copyright on my own videos. So I want to show you this video I did, because I'm never going to be, this was just me. I was by my car and I wanted to put something up because I was feeling that need to vent. A lot of the stuff I do is really based on, I'm sorry, hold on. Let me lower it. Hold on. There we go. A lot of the things I do sometimes are built on a vent. That's how a lot of my correctional videos were really based on vents. So now I'm trying to find ways to utilize that with this. But I have to, I just want to mention something real quick. That's why I try to connect to these cases, because my passion comes through my vents. So like in corrections, I was affected by that and I felt the need to vent. So I'm starting to find that here, believe it or not, which is great. So some shows are scripted, a little bit of this, but it allows for the dialogue. But I do a lot of stuff more scripted now, because I have to keep the integrity of what happened until I feel comfortable enough to venture off a little bit. But I would love your thoughts.
While you're looking at that, isn't there a section in the prison for the that have mental health issues?
Yeah, we have a TCU. Yeah, they all should have, because right now there's been an uptake of those with mental health concerns that are going through the criminal justice system, as opposed to really should be going to a state hospital. And then you have the concerns of convicting them. Yeah. So it used to be an overflow, and now it's, there's no balance here, because now it's not enough. You took the middle component out, the hospital, that some of them require that. So we tend to be managing those who may be better at a long-term facility. But I get what you're saying, because either way, they could still be serviced inside the facility within the safety and security in that setting.
Right.
I get exactly what you meant by that. 100% in agreement with you. Thank you. That's why I love having you on. So this is it right here. I want to share this with you. Hold on. Just make sure it's the right video. Mental health framing. Yeah. And I already knew I was going to have you on, but I want to ask you if you agree with this, because this is where my vent comes from. Here. And thank you. It's less than 3 minutes.
Okay.
Mental health clinician, Denise Schonwald. We're going to revisit the Reiner murders. Recently, I just feel that the media platforms, including social media, have just been saturated with what I feel is a clear defense for Nick Reiner. And I see the narrative shift again. Once the lawyers get involved, the outlets start to change in how they present the story. So I'm starting to get a grasp of how this works. And the scary thing is, sometimes when you want to present the other side, a side that does have accountability, you feel that you have to be censored, because if I do speak my concern, then people will think I'm attacking mental health, or people will think I'm attacking people with addictions. And that's usually not the case. It just presents the other side. But sadly, when the momentum goes into this one direction and there's sympathy, people may not feel sympathy for the person, but rather sympathy for what is causing or what they believe has caused those behaviors. So again, I may not feel sympathy for Nick Reiner, but I feel sympathetic for those with mental health concerns. So therefore, when you say something against Nick Reiner, he is one of the people that may represent someone that has a mental health concern. So it plays onto that card. Also, addiction. You may want to speak on something that relates to Nick Reiner, but now that he could be considered a person with a major addiction, you go to speak a concern, and then it becomes an attack on the addiction. So people like, hey, yo, I'm not talking about any of this because I don't want people to think that I'm against people with addictions or against people with mental health. And it's not. You're speaking your mind on specifically Nick Reiner. That could be a component of it, but it's not the whole thing. And therefore, what winds up happening is one side gets slowly quieted and the other side takes off. And then we lose out on the objective reporting. And then when we stop speaking, the media saturates the market with what I feel is a defense strategy. And the next thing you know, they get there not guilty by insanity. It's a process. And I think we have to start recognizing the process. And when the momentum starts going in that direction, we have to try to keep it more balanced. I'm not saying we have to push it all the way to this side, but we can't allow it to go all the way to the other either. As always, does that make sense to you at all?
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you have me on the show and you're asking my opinion, and certainly I try to give my opinion, but
I love your opinion.
My goal, or the reason that I'm trying to prevent future, I'm trying to educate and help with awareness. And so sometimes when I speculate, I'm not just doing it to just sort of again take a side, but I'm actually trying to look at a lot of these pieces and trying to put a puzzle together, because this information is very helpful. Many of us have family, friends that are struggling with addiction, mental health, and so forth. And it's getting to the point, it seems lately, that it's just becoming more and more violent. The way that they act it out is becoming more and more dangerous. So I'm trying to sort of help educate on mental health and warning signs and so forth, not particularly trying to take a side. So I hope it doesn't come across as I'm taking any sides here.
No, are you kidding me? You're amazing. And to be honest with you, the audience loves you, because even so, it's not a side that they're getting. So with that said, sometimes what we do is we provide that. Like I wanted, when I started doing this a little bit more full time, and yeah, I mean, still love my corrections, but I got to keep the channel alive. I worked really hard on this channel and wasn't moving forward. And I figured true crime would be something I could be a little bit more comfortable in, but it takes a little bit more work. And I knew I was going to do this eventually after I went on duty, Ron, and saw the love from there. But it was a matter of, could I commit to the work? And to be honest with you, with the help of AI and watching a few videos here and there, I'm able to manage a little bit more than before, because if I didn't have these tools, it would be a lot harder to get up and give an opinion, because I need to know as much as I can know.
Yes.
A lot of people may be comfortable with just going on there, watching a news clipping and talking about it. I can't do that. I can't. I mean, I got upset that I was wrong about something, but people supported me because in the context of what I knew and what was out, it made sense for me to be open to that line. And I was the only person that was open to this perspective. But that's where I was pointed. Everybody else was going with this more popular thought, but I didn't do it to just be unpopular. I did it because it made sense.
Yeah.
Also, I was also living on hope that the little girl was still alive, and I think that also blinded me to the reality of the mother could take her child in Utah and just shoot her in the head multiple times. It was a horrendous story. And that's funny, because I would love to have you on again when you're more familiar with the case. I know you've been doing a lot with the Reiner stuff, but about a mother killing her own child. I would love to discuss that a little bit more. But either way, so I try to be objective, and what I've been realizing is, like yourself, I connect to some of the cases, and then I'll be watching it a little bit out of when I'm at home, or I'm listening to it when I'm driving to work, whatever it is, and then I just hear stuff that I don't just disagree with, but I passionately am upset with it.
Mm-hmm.
because it's like ignoring one whole side. So then that's what
Yes.
motivates me to now go after the people that kind of put out, because I'm not perfect, but come on, guys, you're spoon feeding something and the timing, and then you find out they're sponsors or like defense attorneys, and it's like, what are
Mm-hmm.
we doing?
Mm-hmm. I can tell you when I had heard before where Rob Reiner had spoken openly about, the therapists and all the people that help, they just have diplomas on the wall and they weren't, they weren't as helpful as they were and so forth. I heard that, but I can tell you that probably a lot of the therapists that saw the outcome of this case, although it was shocking, did not find it all that far-fetched. I mean, that
Oh,
happens a
really?
lot of times in therapy. Like I certainly, that's not the outcome that I hope for, but doesn't surprise me if something does happen, particularly like domestic violence and something you think like eventually, he's going to kill her or she's going to kill him. And when it does happen, it's shocking, but it's not, you're not so surprised by it.
No, it's funny. Actually, I think when we discussed on a little bit of the last time, I know Rob felt that the professional side of all this failed him, but I think when you have somebody that's going through something 17 times, I don't think it's no longer the system. I think it's obviously the
Correct.
person being resistant. But what was your thoughts on this other video I sent you, if you got a chance to watch it, with the guy making complaints about the cost?
Yes. So I thought that was really interesting because my first year into practice, I worked in a inpatient facility for drug addiction. And it was one of these type of facilities that took insurance, some of the lower cost insurance. And it was basically a typical, I wouldn't say a Holiday Inn, but a very inexpensive place. If you have means and if you have money, you don't want to go to just a typical place. You want to go to a luxurious place. You want to go to where they have really, nice facilities and so forth. You want to they'll have yoga and they have all these, top of the line speakers and mental health professionals. You're going to pay for that. And people who have means are willing to pay $10,000 a month or something ridiculous because they want that kind of service. To say that these places are unqualified, I just don't agree. I think that they all have therapists, they all have psychiatrists, they all have all their other treatment options. I think are probably state of the art. And as you said before, if the person doesn't want to change, it doesn't matter how expensive it is,
Right.
or how much they offer, they're just not going to change.
When you find one was what that one was like what 75,000 a month.
It doesn't surprise me, but where I live down here in Sarasota, I mean, they pay a lot of money. I mean, they go top of the line. And if you have a child and you have the means, you're going to send them to a place that's, like the Ritz-Carlton.
Is it more for comfortability though? When I know the one guy said this is not something you want them to be comfortable at either, so are you paying for comfortability?
Well, you're also paying for a beautiful grounds. And I honestly, I have a friend that's in the business and he actually goes around and buys these places and they don't even look at like a house or something under $1 million or $2 million. They want something really expensive because they're going to charge the people that come, top dollar. And there's a lot of people that can afford it. There's a lot of very wealthy people that have children or siblings and that need this. And it makes them feel better that they're going to someplace, sort of bougie.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that they mentioned too. Like when you have the means to do it, like, I mean, Rob Reiner, just by the fact that he has the means, would that, imagine he said, I sent my son to a place that's a couple $100 a month. When someone would say, well, yeah, but you got this place that's 70, how come you're not sending them there? And it's like, you're trying to do the value of the help by the amount you pay. But some people say that's not always the case in these places. Yeah. You may get really good help from people that you're not paying $70,000 a month for.
True, but some people want the top of the line. Same with alcohol, alcohol rehab and detox. There are some places that you would consider sort of very basic, and there are some that are absolutely gorgeous. So while they're detoxing, they're sitting up on a mountaintop and drinking really a nice cup of coffee and making it a little bit more tolerable for them.
And so then the one discussion that the guy had was, comfortable versus uncomfortable. I mean, it's meant to be uncomfortable. That's why you get the resistance. But if you make it too comfortable, then there's really nothing stopping them from going back and doing it again. It was a unique perspective that I thought was worth presenting your way.
Yep. And
now we're
high relapse with drugs. High relapse with drug addiction. There's a high relapse percentage, like 98% will go back and some at some point relapse.
Comfortable or not comfortable, doesn't matter, right?
No, it really is. And we see this with eating disorders. When they go back into their life and their quote unquote rehab, when push comes to shove or trauma, that tendency, will start to, that sort of itch or, compulsion or that feeling of wanting to do what they did before comes back.
I think when I was watching The Shield, I think I mentioned this before, Connie, the lady that played the prostitute, she only survives a couple of seasons. She played a very good character. It was a mother that was addicted. And I'm aware of that a little bit because I worked in a female facility and I saw a lot of the same mannerisms, behaviors, a lot of the same stories. So not only was it well written, it was well played.
Yeah.
So I got the media narrative versus clinical and legal reality. This is definitely something where I feel definitely falls within your expertise. So I got a little bit to read here, and then I would love to get your thoughts. The problem with premature narratives, and this is where we're at now, from both the clinical and journalistic standpoint, allowing media narratives to run ahead of evidence is dangerous and potentially harmful to victims, families, and public understanding. Media coverage of cases like Reiner's often relies on unnamed or anonymous sources who may have partial, biased, or inaccurate information, like defense attorneys. Conflates emotional background with legal conclusions. Like, for example, he was struggling becomes he may have been insane. And insane is really a legal word.
Yes.
Uses clinical terminology loosely. Terms like psychotic break, mental breakdown, or delusional are used without clinical basis. And it's funny because I put that on my thumbnail and someone messaged back, what they say? Psychotic break. And it goes perfect with what I'm trying to do here. Present sympathetic backstories as mitigating factors before any legal evaluation has occurred. So what clinicians require before drawing conclusions. So now this goes on your side of the work, is mental health professionals are trained to avoid making conclusions without about legal insanity without direct evaluation of the defendant in a controlled clinical setting, complete medical and psychiatric records, including medication history, diagnosis, and treatment compliance, collateral interviews with family members, friends, employees, and other witnesses, and timeline consistencies mapping the defendant's mental state in the hours and days leading up to, during, and after the alleged crime. And then you need objective testing and observation, not just self-report or family recollection. So when the public consumes narratives built on speculation, they may mistake explanation for exoneration long before courts, forensic evaluators, or even defense attorneys have weighed in. So again, for this platform, we try for factual accuracy as best we can, and also victim advocacy. Let's not forget that. So we want to wait for official evaluations before presenting mental health claims as established facts. We want to distinguish between struggled with mental health and was legally insane. We want to avoid language that prematurely frames violence as a result of untreated illnesses. And we want to have something that is kind of centering victims and their families, not just the defendant's psychological profile. So the question I have here, there's a lot there, I know, is how should we evaluate media narratives about mental health in criminal cases? So if I'm from the outside looking in, let's say I'm following Tear Talk, right? I mean, what would be the best advice for me so I know as a viewer I'm not being misfed strategy?
And I will tell you, this is true in a lot of things. A lot of people, a lot of my clients will say he's got OCD or he acts bipolar. So we tend to hear these words and then we use them freely. She had a psychotic break, and yet you're not really qualified to diagnose a psychotic break. So what I would say with any sort of media is you read it, but you also have to understand that there's a lot more to the story that you haven't quite gotten yet. Even when I do couples counseling, I always say there's two sides to the pancake. I'm hearing one side, but there's a lot of history there. And you need to be clinically trained to understand what, you have to meet criteria to get certain diagnoses or to explain a certain symptom. You can't just throw those terms out loosely. And if you're not really in the profession, you don't know how to do that. I'm sure you see that in corrections too.
Oh yeah, of course. And wait, you made a good point. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Going back to the psychotic break. Is that acute? Is that in the moment?
Yeah. So all of a sudden you get to the point again where you quote lose your mind.
In the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It'll like it's like something snaps.
And
you
it's
have
hard
like
to
a
say.
psychotic break. It's almost like everything builds, and then all of a sudden you have an episode.
Would it be impossible to maybe in general say how long there was a psychotic break? That could be dependent on so many different variables, right?
Correct. And chemically what's going on. That case that I told you about, the son that, sort of when it attacked the mom, later on they found him just sort of like sitting by some water, just sort of staring into space. Like
Is
just
the calmness,
just sort of like, just almost, just sort of staring. And the police obviously were called and went out, and he was just sort of out of it. And I think that was just sort of the counter to letting go of so much adrenaline, epinephrine, because he did quite a violent act. And then, he was basically tapped out and sitting by the pond staring into space.
Let me ask you a question. If I was on the prosecution side, I don't know if this would matter because people could play the system, but hypothetically, because people could always play the system, I would be very curious of how his initial stay in the jail was. Was he crying? Was he overwhelmed? Because if you're going through something psychotic and then all of a sudden reality breaks in and then reality cuts in and then you realize what you've done, you got to be overwhelmed by that. You can't just sit there and be calm. I mean, I was thinking, would being calm after doing something that violent, would that be part of the psychotic break?
Yeah, that can be. And this case that I've been telling you about, this kid had no violent history. So he basically had this psychotic break, and for whatever reason, he committed this violent crime. We know with Nick, he had a violent history. He had, he had destroyed things. He had, so he had other incidences that let us know that this wasn't his only quote outburst. This was the most, obviously the most aggressive and the most violent, but he had other episodes. This case that I'm talking about with the son, he went to jail and he wasn't a violent kid. And so the reason they had to put him in that section that I was asking you about is really for his protection, because he was not violent. He did not have a temper.
How old was he again?
He had gone off to college, and something was off, and he came home, and the mom opened the door and he had a hatchet, and he just had a psychotic break, and he just cut off her finger, put one in her head and put her in a coma for 3 months. But the husband saw what was going on. I don't know if he went after the husband too, called the police, and then when the police found him, he was out staring at the water, just sort of in a trance.
And then if you ask, I know sometimes we look at something violent, and some of the ways we try to find closure, believe it or not, sometimes we ask ourselves, did the victim do anything to, I'm not going to say deserve this, but to cause this type of reaction? And sometimes there is no closure in that. It just happens to be.
Correct. And in this case, because she lived, she had to testify against him.
She did live.
She was, after 3 months in a coma. So she had to testify, and she was very conflicted. On one hand, you don't want to testify against your own child and know that he's going to go to prison. On the other hand, he could not be trusted. And even though he had no history of that, what he did was very violent, and she was never the same afterwards.
If he could do that to his mother, he could do it to anybody. So she
exactly.
has to do that.
And why her? Yeah, he didn't know. He says all of a sudden, I guess he had this delusion that it's funny, just really sad.
It's funny, as a mother or as a parent in general, when does your responsibility to your child kind of switch to responsibility for the world, right, about your child? If that makes sense.
I'm sure many listening to this have been in that situation. You know,
Oh
when
yeah.
you know that your child is violent, you know that, or they're abusing a spouse or a child, and so forth.
I mean, it's funny because you could always shift the narrative too, where, and it's true, like if I'm the mother, I'm responsible for my child. And then when my child starts hurting others, I'm still responsible for my child by protecting my child, by securing them, protecting them from
Yes.
themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
Still
Are
a
they a
level
danger
of,
to themselves or are they a danger to others?
yeah,
And
because
it's tough when it's a family member.
yeah, because you feel, even though you're doing the right thing, you feel there's a sense of betrayal. But if you could word it in a way that makes sense, sometimes, and I really think this is true, sometimes I think the inner thoughts are really about answering questions. And sometimes you ask yourself the wrong questions that demotivate you. But if you
Mm-hmm.
ask yourself the right questions or frame it in a way that showcases the benefit, like if I had to do something for my daughter I didn't want to do, but I had to do it for her own interest, I'm not going to, maybe wording it by saying, I got to do this to protect this, wording it this way would be wrong. Considering my daughter a monster and having to do this, I got to protect others from her. But then I'm like, oh, I can't settle with that. That doesn't feel right. But if I could say
Mm-hmm.
something in my head, still the same thing. But I got to protect my daughter from herself, and this is the best way I need to do it is
Yes.
by securing her. Then your loyalty's still there.
Yes. This is a way that I can help her so that she can be safe around other people and also safe with herself.
Yeah,
So we
I
call
think
that reframing.
and I
You
think
just
that plays
reframe
out
it.
here. I think that plays out here because I think there was a responsibility that Rob felt to his son, but I think the problem is the son could maybe nothing's 100%, but when the son was resistant, he could have manipulated the father to the father thought that by doing this, he's going against his son when it's not. You're actually doing it for your son, but you're not going to get your son's approval.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's
I think the parents didn't know what to do. I mean,
right.
like what else do you do at some point where he's violent? You can't, they took him to a party that didn't go out, that didn't go over well. I mean, I just think that they were running out of options.
Especially when $70,000 a month ain't working.
Yeah.
Um, so again, guys, I think a good thing is knowing how his first couple of days was at the facility to see if there was any type of immediate reaction to what he did. So now I have number 4, the feeling inadequate, because it was said, of course, in one of the articles from TMZ that could be he feels inadequate to his family because his family's successful, he's not. So what we're hearing is media reports have suggested that Nick Reiner may have felt inadequate compared to his successful parents, overshadowed by family expectations, struggling with identity, purpose, or self-worth. Clinical context, from a clinical standpoint, these are common human experiences, especially for young adults navigating family dynamics, career uncertainty, or social comparison. These feelings can contribute to chronic stress, low self-esteem, depression or anxiety, substance use as a coping mechanism. But what they do not explain is feeling inadequate, struggling with identity, or living in the shadow of accomplished parents. It does not cause psychosis, a break from reality involving hallucinations, delusions, or disorganized thinking. Does not remove moral agency or the ability to distinguish right from wrong, and does not explain extreme violence in the absence of other severe psychiatric symptoms. The risk of narrative inflation, when media elevates feelings of inadequacy into a casual explanation for murder, it pathologizes or pathologizes, that word, there's pathology, normal psychological struggles, implies that anyone experiencing similar feelings might become violent, shifts focus from the defendant's actions to their internal emotional state, and creates a post hoc justification that is not supported by clinical science. So what the research actually shows is studies on family homicide consistently show that while mental illness and substance abuse are more common among perpetrators than the general population, the vast majority of people with these conditions never commit violence. The presence of psychological distress does not predict or explain violence unless it reaches the level of severe acute psychosis, and even then, only in rare cases. So the question here is, can feelings of inadequacy or living in the shadow of successful parents explain violent behavior? Because that's a narrative being tossed out there.
And I think it's weak because so what if I say that just the opposite? Because my parents were poor and I didn't get the gifts that I needed and I didn't have opportunities, then I have low self-worth and so forth. I mean, it's weak. The jury may have a hard time sort of buying into the poor kid who was the child's of successful parents and he felt bad about himself. I mean, it's going to be a tough one for me to sell or to get people to buy into.
Yeah, and when I saw this article, I don't need to read it, but I want to just Nick right here, just so you know, I didn't make it up. There it is, right there. Nick Reiner felt inadequate. You see it? Nick Reiner, addiction expert on Nick Reiner, famous family may have led to lack of self-worth. So the reason why I'm thinking of that is they're creating a context that goes from addiction.
Yep.
Then the arguments are, well, you chose to put the drugs in your mouth, to mental health. Well, maybe you didn't really have enough of a choice. And then the stuff that could have caused it, which now the family's success. It's like shitting on the family.
Yeah. And I will tell you, low self-worth, when people say, I have low self-worth, I have low self-esteem, what that equals to is I have a huge ego. Because when you have low self-worth, you think everything that anybody does, says, thinks has something to do with you. And it doesn't sound like that makes sense, but trust me, low self-worth means I have a huge ego and everything revolves around me.
That makes sense. I could see that exactly the way you said it. I think that makes sense to me. I'm curious what my audience would think. I think that makes sense. That's a great way of looking at it. It could be some level of what not grandiose, but entitlement. Would that work?
Well, they call it a paradox because you think low self-worth is I don't want anybody to think about me. I feel so bad about myself. I'm not worthy of the spotlight. But somebody who with low self-worth will go into the grocery store and wonder what people are thinking of them. And I try to tell them
they're the center of attention.
Yeah, they're constantly, it's all about me. What do people think about me? Oh, people are judging me. I don't want to go out because people will look at me. And it's like, and I try to tell them in a nice way, nobody cares. Like nobody cares like what you look like in the grocery store. I mean, unless you're wearing something, outrageous, and then they only care for a minute. Maybe less time.
That's true. Because we're too involved in our own shit.
We are. Yeah, exactly. We only care about ourselves.
That's true. Okay, so we have to touch on the addiction role in accountability. So impairment versus insanity.
Yep.
So why addiction complicates but rarely excuses? Because again, it's being presented. At least was one of the first things they presented. Addiction is often raised in criminal cases as mitigating factors, but it typically weakens rather than strengthens in insanity defenses. The legal distinction, voluntary versus involuntary impairment. Courts generally distinguish between involuntary mental illness, so schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or other conditions that arise without the person's choice. Voluntary intoxication or substance-induced impairment are usually conditions caused or significantly worsened by the defendant's own drug or alcohol use. In most jurisdictions, voluntary intoxication is not a defense to criminal charges, including murder. So in California, under Penal Code subsection 29.4, voluntary intoxication can only be used to argue that the defendant did not form the specific intent required for certain crimes. So maybe premeditated murder versus second-degree murder. It cannot be used to argue legal insanity. So if Nick Reiner was under the influence of drugs or alcohol at the time of the alleged murder, that fact would likely undermine an insanity defense. Courts view it as self-induced impairment, but potentially reduce first-degree murder to second-degree murder if it negated premeditation. But it does not eliminate criminal responsibility. Now, from the clinical perspective on addiction and violence, from a clinical standpoint, what I got, and this is why I love your thoughts, addiction impairs judgment, impulse control, and emotional regulation, but impaired judgment is not the same as legal insanity. Substance use can trigger or worsen psychiatric symptoms, but if the psychosis is substance-induced, it's generally not considered involuntary. And most people struggling with addiction do not commit violence, and addiction alone does not explain extreme acts like family homicide. So again, how does addiction affect legal accountability and insanity claims?
Well, and it's tough too, because addiction or drug use and all of that is a choice. That's something that we choose to do, and knowing the risks. So one thing about addiction is we always think that all the risks are not going to happen to me. And so we get very egoic about our drug or alcohol of choice. And we don't recognize a lot of times that it does have consequences or ramifications. it can be tough for me to say, oh, it's because I was high or something. So then you have to let me off of whatever act that I did that is causing me to be in court. It's going to be weak, and it's going to be hard for people to, sort of give you the benefit of the doubt and think you're really a nice person when you're not going to take responsibility for what you did because of the choices that you made. As far as,
and you definitely saw that playing out at the beginning. Well, now I believe they're starting to see the weakness in that argument. And now, so this is funny. I see the media kind of as if I see someone trying to get out of something that they did. They when the evidence is against them, they shift blame, or they try to question credibility, or they point to other people or other things. So in this case here, hey, we put the addiction out there, but now they're starting to come on to us. So now let's put mental health out there. So we could start balancing stuff to make things, because once we put addiction and that's all we had, now people are starting to question, well, hey, you chose to drink. You chose to do drugs. Now, what do we do now? Mental health, because that makes things involuntary.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it? You know what's funny? And I got to ask you this as a mental health clinician. So when it went from addiction to mental health, I think there was a bit of a censorship, even in my mind, because I wanted to say, hey, guys, people choose these addictive behaviors. But my biggest concern coming out right with it, even though I eventually did say it, because I got so frustrated because the media was being saturated by what I thought was a little bit of BS, that I said, screw it. I'm just going to say it, because why not? At this point, it just became a bit frustrating. But with that said, am I being a bit insensitive by saying that addicts choose their behaviors, choose to be addicted, choose to take the substances?
Well, what we choose. So when the nervous system's out of balance, and that means like we're under stress, or we're depressed, or we have difficulty regulating our emotions, our negative emotions. What the mind will do is want to go something out into the environment to get something for ease. And when people say, oh, I don't have that something, they're usually not being truthful, because we like food, we like gambling, like pornography, we like substances, we like alcohol. And what happens with that, and this is why it can be tricky, is because once the mind attaches to it, it's very hard to break. This is why we have Gamblers Anonymous and AA and Overeaters Anonymous and all these kind of groups, because again, we've got to be careful with what the mind attaches to, because what we're attaching to is the feeling. We're looking for the feeling that we get when we take that substance or we eat that certain food, and it can be very hard to break. So do people choose to be addicts? No. I mean, they don't choose it, but what they do is they're not mindful of what they're going to relieve the body, because the body is very stressed when it's holding negative emotions in the body.
All right. So that is something I feel that could be exploited by the media, because it never goes to, and I could picture, if I wanted to push well, you chose that, you wind up in their mind attacking everybody with an addiction. And it's like, I'm not attacking everybody with addiction, but let's be honest. He took these drugs knowing what these drugs could do to him.
Yes. But the drugs sort of all of a sudden really impaired his executive functioning, because alcohol will do that too. Like they have difficulty thinking things through. This is again the challenge of addiction, like alcohol and drugs. Because go ahead.
Oh no. I wanted to ask, but they still know prior that this is what the result's going to be, right? I mean, where does the voluntary choice come in?
Well, of course, when we have these kind of options, like I could smoke some marijuana or whatever, we don't really imagine ourselves to have a problem with that. And people will tell you all the time, oh, well, I only do it recreationally and I don't need it. And that's what they tell themselves so that they can do it. Or I only drink on the weekends, or whatever they say. And that sort of gives them permission to do it, or to drink more, or whatever. The mind likes the smoke and mirrors, so that we can get what we want or need.
So right. And I agree, because if you look at a lot of this stuff with addiction, I'm thinking in my head, a lot of them, because I've seen obviously a lot of programs in my time, they'll tell them it's a choice to quit. So I'm assuming it's a choice to start and maintain.
Yes, and it's a choice to quit, but the mind fights like crazy with that. I mean, the mind is like, no, 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 I need it. No, this is your only vice. No, you're
So
Irish. Of
is it
course
a
we
choice to
drink.
keep fighting then?
Like, oh yeah, the
I mean, there's
mind.
got to be a choice somewhere.
Well, but and it's mental. It's mentally. You have to have mental toughness, which is really hard when the mind gets set on something.
Right.
I mean, because we
And,
dump a lot of dopamine and we want it and we feel like we need it, but it's really, the mind can get very, very powerful and can make very bad choices if we're not, this is why mental health is so important.
and even at some level, it provides an escape.
Of course
So
it
having
does.
said that, it's not just quitting the addiction, but quitting how it makes you feel.
Correct. And the body enjoys the break because the body starts to calm down and it feels good and it's not as stressed. And again, and the mind's like, this is fantastic. And
Mm.
it is, but it's temporary until it wears off and then we need more or we need something else.
And in greater dosage.
Exactly.
So I got behavior before and after the incident, the most telling evidence. So why post-offense behavior matters. So forensic evaluators and courts place enormous weight on what a defendant did immediately before, during, and after the alleged crime. Why? Because behavior in the moment often reveals more about mental state than anything said months later in clinical interviews. What evaluators look for is planning or preparation. So did the defendant take steps that suggest forethought, like acquiring a weapon, choosing a time when others wouldn't be present, disabling security systems? Late at night,
Did that
possibly 2 in
happen?
the
Did the
morning.
security get disabled? I didn't.
No, I just put that as an
Oh,
example.
yeah, it's a good one.
I just put that. But in this case here, I was going to add late at night, overnight, when they're sleeping.
Yep. Yep.
Actions during the incident. Was there organization to the violence, or was it chaotic and disorganized? Very much what you said. Did the defendant respond to the environment logically, like reacting to a victim's pleas or adjusting tactics? Then the post-defense behavior. Did they try to flee, hide, or avoid detection? Did they attempt to clean up evidence or dispose of a weapon? Did they call 911, confess, or express remorse? Or did they act to evade responsibility? Or were they able to communicate coherently with others? And why this often defeats insanity claims? If a defendant took steps to avoid being caught, made rational decisions about escape or concealment, demonstrated cause and effect reasoning, it strongly suggests they understood what they were doing, that it was wrong, and that there would be consequences. Even if they were emotionally distressed, intoxicated, or experiencing some level of mental illness, these behaviors indicate legal sanity. And how does this apply to the Reiner case? Is public reporting will eventually reveal Nick Reiner's actions after the alleged murder. So what we're going to watch is, did he remain at the scene or flee? Did he contact authorities, or was he apprehended, which we know he was apprehended. It's not because he contacted authorities, and he did flee. Did he make statements indicating awareness of what happened? We don't know yet. Not that I know of. And was there evidence of efforts? I'm assuming he may have made the statements to his lawyer, though, Alan Jackson, because Alan Jackson is also pushing the narrative. There's a lot we don't know yet. So I don't think they're going to say that he didn't do it. I think they're going to try to push for the circumstances behind why he did it.
I agree.
And was there evidence of efforts to conceal, clean up, or destroy evidence of the hotel room with the shower? And so the answers will be far more probative of his mental state than any retrospective psychiatric narrative. But Denise, why is behavior before and after the incident so important in evaluating mental state?
Well, we even saw at his trial that he was very solemn. And, again, you can't put out that much adrenaline and epinephrine to do a violent act without being like really exhausted afterwards. Like, it's not like you can go on this, do this violent killing spree and then all of a sudden go out and have a good time, unless you're really an antisocial, serial killer. But, with him, a couple of days later, he's still sort of, is almost lifeless.
Well, that's the question. I think this is going to be a big bulk of the prosecution side. They're going to have to probably push before and after, because we really don't, unless they have security camera of what happened in there, which I don't think they have. Trust me, I don't think they have that. Yeah. And then I think the defense is going to want to keep it in that room, in that moment of ambiguity, and then try to push anything away from that, because they're going to say, well, it doesn't matter what he did before or after. What matters in the moment that he went insane.
I imagine that they had security cameras on the outside, which I mean, most people do. We all have like Ring cameras.
I'm
They,
sure
they
they all,
probably
yeah.
have something of him leaving, or I imagine there's some sort of footage. Of course, we don't know that, but I mean, even we know when Amazon comes to the door, and we don't have that kind of money.
Yeah. Well, if I take, like, if I was on the jury and I looked at this insanity and how it's supposed to work, I mean, I could see myself doing it, trying to do it the way they say and just try to stay focused on the moment. But I don't know what happened in that moment.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to take me here or there on both sides, or like if one side's saying, hey, this is what he did before, this is what he did after, and the other side saying, well, did you know he was addicted? Did you know he suffered from schizophrenia? I'm thinking, well, none of that matters then.
Yeah.
If we're only focused on the moment, then what the hell do I look at when that moment's ambiguous?
Yeah. Yep. And can you imagine how are they going to find people to be on that jury?
Everybody knows.
I mean, it's going to be really tough, because if you have any sort of, like, I wouldn't be selected, you wouldn't be selected.
And that's why we did this, because so we don't get
exactly. We're not going to get picked, but they're going to have a hard time finding people that, one, haven't already heard about it in the media. It's all over the place.
Yep.
I mean, everywhere you look, I mean, they're gonna have some sort of understanding of the case. It's gonna be a tough one.
You know what's funny about that, to be honest with you, to tell you a little something? So since I've been doing true crime, and it's been a little bit of a center now, what I do, I try to share some of these stories, and not that many people know. Like the stuff that's taken off, like I did a lot of videos on Anna Kepner with the cruise ship.
Mm-hmm.
And relevant in my life, centered right now on the stuff I do, and no one knows of that case.
Yeah, I didn't until you brought it to my attention that I had to research it. It's true.
So I think it's like people. I think Rob Reiner has the connection of being a celebrity, but I think people get the initial stuff and then they move on with their day. So they may know, oh, he'd been killed by his son, but maybe they free themselves from the context. So maybe I may not be able to find someone who doesn't know about the death, but the circumstances behind it. I mean, how many people are truly following in that detail? Usually, oh shit, Rob Reiner died. Okay, I'm on my day.
Although in his case, a lot of them are attaching him to their favorite movies, and they're staying on it a little bit longer.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like my mom too. But as I said, it's just the media puts it out there, and I think that the good lawyers know how to utilize the media and keep the narrative in their favor, because the narrative for the defense will strengthen when the prosecutor has to be quiet for the integrity of the investigation. So they fill up the air with ambiguity.
It'll be interesting if the brother and sister have to testify. Not necessarily.
I have a feeling
that'll play in.
I'm very curious about that too. I think they're gonna. I know this may sound crazy, but I think they're the ones paying for the defense. I think they're involved. I think they're. I don't know. I don't know if they know their brother had all these concerns. I mean, here's the funny thing. It would be like if I was the defense attorney, I'm going to lean on the family, because I'd be saying all these things, but then I'm going to have the family that's going to go like this and say, none of that's true.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming the stuff that they're saying now has to be in partnership with the family, because in the end, if you want to say you had all these concerns, then the family is the best people to have on your side or have on the other side. So before you pop up all this shit, where's the family? And I have a feeling that they're able to comfortably do this. I could be wrong, but maybe the family is preparing to stand by Nick.
Yeah, but then look at my other case where, she knew that she didn't want to put her son in prison, but that she knew that if she sort of lied and said that he didn't do it or whatever, that he was going to potentially do it again. So, I mean, and anybody that's, sort of questioning the brother and the sister are going to say, oh, so you're saying that he doesn't have a violent history? What about on whatever date with, the guest house and all that kind of stuff? It's going to be tough for them to lie and get away with it if they have a good, attorney sort of questioning them.
I mean, the question why the death penalty may not be that big of a thing is because if the prosecutor wanted the family on their side, would they be okay with the death penalty?
Yeah, I can't see him getting the death penalty. I couldn't,
but I could see the strategy of not even implementing it from the prosecutor side, because what would that mean? That the family, I would get the family on my side to help put their brother to death, no matter how crazy it is what they did or what Nick did. I can't expect maybe two key witnesses here at some level, maybe not so much the event, but of who a character witness, if need be. are they going to want to put Nick to death? And the funny thing is, there was one part where they started trying to attack Rob, and it didn't go nowhere. But like maybe how he treated Nick, and it looked like they were pushing into things that were inappropriate. Again, that's going to quickly negate it, because if the family's saying that never happened, what else you going on?
And if Rob Reiner or Michelle Reiner didn't have any sort of anger or frustration, I mean, to me, that's normal. You have a kid that, you have a son that's not thriving, that's, using, that's been in 17 or whatever many rehabs. It's trashing the guest house. I mean, obviously they're going to be frustrated and ticked off and outraged.
Yeah. And I would assume multiple times trying to talk to him. And then, I mean, the funny thing is, and it's funny how they put everything on Rob and Michelle, but you also have Jake and Rami. I mean, they also know him well too. Why did they ever make suggestions that he needs to be somewhere? I had a section about psychosis versus goal-directed behavior, what the evidence looks like, but I think we kind of discussed that. But I'm going to ask you, the question towards the end of it was, how do clinicians distinguish between psychosis and goal-directed behavior? Do you think that was covered, or do you have anything you want to add to
that? Yeah, I think we did.
Okay, so I do want to do this medication claims in the media, and why this requires extreme caution, because they're claiming about his meds. At one point, there may have been a change. So why medication narratives are common. Medication changes are frequently raised in media coverage of criminal cases because they sound scientific and clinical, seems to provide a concrete, identifiable cause, and generate sympathy if only the medication had worked. Why clinicians are skeptical. From a clinical and forensic standpoint, medication narratives are extraordinarily complex and almost impossible to evaluate without complete record. What clinicians would need to know is full medication history. What was prescribed, when, by whom, and for what diagnosis, dosages and compliance. Was the person taking the medication as prescribed, skipping doses, taking more than prescribed? Timing. When was the medication started, stopped, or changed relative to the incident? Substance interaction. Was the person using alcohol or drugs that interacted with psychiatric medication? Side effects and adverse reactions. Did the person experience akathisia, severe restlessness? Did I say that right? Serotonin syndrome or other dangerous reactions? And baseline mental state. What was the person's conditions before the medication changed? Without this information, claims like he went off his meds, the new medication made him violent, he was over medicated, are scientifically meaningless and potentially dangerous. And why this matters is medication narratives are often simplified and weaponized in public discourse in ways that stigmatize psychiatric treatment, which is discouraging people from seeking help, oversimplify the relationship between medication and behavior, and distract from personal accountability and other contributing factors. Clinicians are trained to be extremely cautious here, and so should investigators and journalists. So the question here is, why should we be skeptical of media claims about medication changes? Because that's been out there now.
Well, I have a question for you. When people go into the corrections, do they normally get blood work, or is it just if they're concerned about something?
Well, they do their labs, they do checks. So again, I could do stuff with inmates that. So Jersey runs a little bit differently. Just in general, we're allowed we're allowed to make decisions of force med protocol, where other states they can't. So the decisions made through a chairperson, which is admin, and then on the board would be a psychiatrist and a psychologist. And basically every year they have to check the medication and make sure, one, it's working, and that the inmates are taking taking the medication. But more, the big thing about that is that they're aware that they need it, and most of them are willing to take it. But the reason why they're on it is, they're willing to take it until they're not forced to take it, right? Because they may not be aware of what they're going through. So that those questions are asked. Okay, are you aware you're sick? Well, I'm not sick. Okay, so you may be willing, you comply, you never give us a problem, never refuse. But the reason why you're on forced med is you also don't admit you're sick. But we do check lab results, and during those meetings, they are able to tell medical, or the psychiatrist, more importantly, that when I take this, I can't do these things. Want to hear what the biggest complaint is most of the time, just in general, is complaint with arousal. And or the other complaint would be I'm sleepy all day. So they don't want to be on a drug.
Yeah, they feel numbed out. But I'm thinking in this case, when he went into the, corrections, that they did blood work and they looked at, tox screen, all that kind of stuff. I can't imagine that wasn't done. So that'll tell you if whatever medications he was on, whether he was like his lithium level was normal, if he's on lithium. I mean, I would think that that would be something to consider. But, one of the things that you brought up is compliance is huge. A lot of times people are prescribed, they take too much of. So it's hard to know like what he was on, what he was taking, what substances or what he was drinking. I mean, it would be really hard to speculate whether or not any sort of medications had anything to do with this.
Right. So my thing is when we see the medication, even if it's, they say the dosage, whatever, usually it's about the dosage most of the time. Mm-hmm. That if it's too much, they're lethargic, whatever it is, and if it's too little, it's not enough.
Right.
So I mean, if you feel that the medication could make the person violent if it's not properly provided, I mean, would that be someone that you'd want in the community? I mean, let me ask you a question, your experience. So they're saying mismedication. So there's different ways things can be missed. I'm thinking more of dosage because that's what I'm used to, because people are taking the meds they're supposed to take. But usually when we're doing these hearings, it's about the dosage, or they may not like this brand because of the side effect, but they do need this medication. So they may switch to maybe a less generic brand. But it's usually something that they need to take, but they're either questioning the side effect or mostly the side effect, but also, do I need to take this much?
Right. Do I need it? Do I need to take it? Is this really helping me?
But is there any point where, so what I'm trying to say is there any point where the medication makes them violent, or is it because it's not doing enough?
We usually, if anything, the medication will make them numbed out. So they don't feel
That's
like,
what I thought.
So it's more, that's the concern, where they feel like, like they're just sort of like they're wearing a mask and they're not really enjoying life. So if anything, that's the concern, more or less. It makes me, I mean, I've never heard of it makes me violent. I have heard it gives me anxiety, but
Right.
Anxiety and being violent are two different things.
I agree with you. Now, again, I'm not a mental health professional, but I do agree with you. I've sat in a lot of panels, trust me. So you learn a lot just from sitting there and doing it. So I feel when I heard mismedication, I'm thinking not taking enough. So if he has something inside him that's aggressive, I don't know. That's a little bit more beyond me, but then you don't take enough. And that usually is because, one, if they're doing it themselves, they're not taking it. Or two, maybe he had concerns about his side effects and the doctor may have said, you know what, maybe we'll lower the dosage on this part.
Yeah.
But that's still.
It's true. And what we were seeing with bipolar and schizophrenia is they were doing, or I don't know if they still are, like monthly shots, because one of the biggest challenges is noncompliance. So they had to have a shot once a month. And then this way they were good for a month and we didn't have to worry about them taking their medication or not. So that was one of the ways they were trying to get around that.
And that's more expensive though, right?
Yeah. But, in this case, I don't think money was a problem.
No. Over $200 million estate. All right, so that's interesting. So that was a question that they asked, and they put it totally on, mental health for giving him the wrong minute. But we don't know how compliant he was. We don't know what he's telling the doctors. Yes. Maybe the doctors made a shift based on what he told them.
Right. Plus, I will tell you, this is my nursing background and with mental health, when they're starting medication, they start at a low dose and then they're slowly titrating and working their way up. Like they're not just, throwing a whole bunch of medications together. Yeah. Because what they want to do is get the effects that they're looking for with the least amount of medication.
Smart. Right. Makes sense.
So same thing when people come into critical care. We'd start a drip at a really low dose and hope that would sort of do it. And they would sort of, take over and their blood pressure would get better. Their heart rate would come down. We didn't want to just start with a high dose and then, and then potentially get ourselves into trouble.
So you're always on that line.
You're always on the little bit, and then, add a little bit more, maybe, or like cut it back a little bit. You're trying to get the best result with the least amount of medication.
So that makes it very risky when you do cut it back because you're already bare minimum.
Well, it depends on how much you're on. I mean, if you're getting more and more and more, and then we're cutting it back, maybe we're on but the clinicians, the people that do meds, particularly, well, any kind of med, they're very sophisticated in what they're doing. That's all they do. So they're usually, I mean, it's not like they're just throwing stuff out and not really, understanding what these side effects are. They're looking at all the symptoms, all the complaints, what the family said, and then they're deciding on, the best medication that they think would be appropriate for this patient. And as we know, they vary.
And I'm going to tell you something right now. The only people that know that would be people working with him directly, not the media.
Yep, exactly.
So 2 last questions. I had to add this one: compassion without minimization, the balance clinicians navigate daily, the false dichotomy. So one of the most damaging myths in public discourse around mental health and crime is that we must choose between compassion for the defendant or accountability for their actions. That's what I felt. And accountability, sometimes people look at being punitive, which I disagree. And I think this is, in my mind, this is a false choice. I found myself, even when I was trying to do my videos, that why do I feel in conflict? And it's because I'm making it a conflict. It's not an either or here. So what compassion actually means is compassion in the clinical and legal context means recognizing suffering. So acknowledging that mental illness, addiction, trauma, and family dysfunction are real and painful. Understanding context, considering how someone's life experiences may have contributed to their struggles. Avoiding stigma, so not treating mental illness as a character flaw or moral failing. And supporting treatment, ensuring people have access to care even in the justice system. What accountability means is acknowledging harm, recognizing the devastation caused to victims and their families, accepting legal responsibility, holding individuals responsible for their actions when they had the capacity to understand right from wrong, centering victims, ensuring that sympathy for the defendant does not erase the humanity and suffering of those harmed, and supporting consequences. That centering the victim is where I get most frustrated, when I see it going away from the victim and going back towards the defendant as if they're the victim, just on another scale, at a higher scale, sadly. And then supporting consequences, recognizing that accountability, including incarceration, can be necessary for public safety and in some cases the defendant's own treatment and rehabilitation, and why these concepts are not mutually exclusive. In fact, accountability is often necessary for meaningful treatment and rehabilitation. Research on criminal justice and mental health consistently show that many defendants with serious mental illness benefit from structured environments with access to treatment. Accountability can be part of the therapeutic process, helping individuals understand the impact of their actions, and victim-centered justice is not incompatible with compassionate treatment for defendants. As someone who supervised educational programs, I oversaw it. I facilitated their needs. I did have supervisors of education, but when you're in prison administration, you're responsible for the outcome of the whole house, and that was one of my areas of responsibility. So I oversaw the facilitation of it. In a correctional for years, I saw this firsthand. Inmates who took responsibility for their actions were far more likely to engage in treatment, education, and genuine change. So again, question here, and there's one more after this, is how can we balance compassion for mental illness with accountability for violence?
Well, certainly as a mental health practitioner, you have to have compassion or you would never stay in the field, because, your goal is to guide and help and, and foster and so forth. So you have to have that compassion. On the other hand, you need to take responsibility for the job. So you need to understand that people have choices and there are consequences for their choices. And this is where it's really important for someone like me to have compassion, but also detach, because I can't take responsibility for them. They have to take responsibility for their choices. And just because I feel bad doesn't mean that I should not be objective and not sort of give my true clinical opinion, regardless of how the family takes it or how the person takes it. And so you have to have both. But the truth be told, people need to be accountable for their choices, whether they like it or not.
No, I live in a world of what I would hope to be accountability. So now the reason why I bring that towards here is a full circle is at least for the addiction side, then I shouldn't feel discomfort when I say, well, that is a choice, because at some level it has to be.
Well, it's a choice, but I feel compassion because I know that to get there, there's a lot of hurt, pain, and suffering underneath it. So I'm sad, even for alcoholism. I'm sad that they're in so much pain that this is the only thing that they can go to for relief that seems to, in their minds, work. So I do feel compassion for them, even though I understand that there's responsibility and there's choices and there are consequences with what we choose to go to for ease.
Right. So interestingly, I love what you're saying. I just learned a lot from you. So interestingly, because I think this becomes the center of where I always get conflict in regards to what I can say and what I can't say, the censorship involved.
Mm-hmm.
There's situational compassion, but with that said, it is truly not to be centered as an excuse.
Correct.
Right. So it gets to a point where I'm compassionate for the circumstances you're facing. I get that you're going through this, and I get that, there are certain situations that's making you want to choose these routes because it's easier to escape than to face it. But at one point, when does that become an excuse to escape responsibility? And then when is it okay for me to then say, no, now it's a choice?
Correct. And ultimately we have to take responsibility for the choices that we make, good and bad. So we make good choices, think good things happen. Absolutely. In fact, people say to me all the time, I'm doing so much better. Thank you for everything that you did. And I go, I didn't do anything. All I did was offer. You did all the work. I mean, there's a good consequence. But ultimately, when we make poor choices and bad decisions, bad things are going to happen. And I'm sorry that it got to that, but unfortunately, that's what's going to happen.
So I like what you said, because I just learned a lot just in this last part. Well, the whole thing, but just this last part here, because if the pattern becomes just something that embraces, I got a thought here. Hold on. So if the pattern is something that just embraces excuse-driven behavior, right? Because I can utilize that to get out of responsibility.
Yep.
Then at that point, as a clinician, I'm assuming you have to let the person know that right now you're using your past or whatever it is as an excuse to continue to go down the rabbit hole.
Correct. And I'll give you an example that has nothing to do with this that may help the listeners sort of get it. I'll see kids that are like, I don't know, 23, 24. They're living with their parents. They can't work because they have too much anxiety. They can't go to school because school's not for them. So therefore, they're choosing to do nothing. And so I'll say to the parents, well, what do they do all day? Well, they sleep until 11 or 12, and then they get on the computer and so forth. And I go, okay, well then, like, life is never going to be good to them because developmentally they're not thriving. And they go, I know, but they're too anxious to work. And it's like, okay, no, they need to work. And usually these people, the parents don't come back because they don't want to allow the child to face the consequences of poor choices. They still pay for their phone. They give them a free place to live. They buy them whatever they want. And unfortunately, that's not going to help them.
Right. Agreed. And actually, the last question here is a bit repetitive. So the one last thing I have before we close is the Nick Reiner case, like so many others, will test our ability as a society and as investigators to hold space for complexity without abandoning truth. Mental health matters. Addiction is real. Family dynamics shape us, but none of these facts absolve someone of responsibility for taking the lives of their parents. If the evidence ultimately shows that Nick Reiner was experiencing a severe psychotic break and rendered him incapable of understanding his actions, then the legal system will adjudicate that claim through a rigorous evidence-based process. Until then, our job is to follow the facts, honor the victims, and refuse to let sympathetic narratives obscure the gravity of what occurred. There was 2 myths here I want to ask you real quick. The first myth is, and it's kind of what we discussed, but if someone has mental illness and commits a violent crime, they must have been insane. And the reality of that is we said no, right?
Correct.
And the second myth I had was, where's the other myth? I had 2. Where's my other one? Oh, no. The second myth is, out of your curiosity, after the whole, from your perspective, the whole dialogue we just did, What do you think is the biggest misconception about the insanity plea if we had to kind of round up this dialogue?
Oh, let's see. The biggest about the insanity plea. I think and I'm not sure I'm right about this, but I think they think that this is going to be an easy thing to prove because the whole thing doesn't really make any sense. And they think that this may be something that will be easy to get the jury to believe. Based on what we've talked about so far, I don't know that it's going to be an easy case, personally.
Okay. No, I agree. I think since I've been watching the news and putting the stuff that they get out there, I want people to realize that the insanity plea for me is based more in the moment.
Correct.
Of when it
happens. And to me, it's going to be more difficult to prove. I don't think it's that straightforward. I think there's going to be a lot of evidence that comes in, and I think there's going to be a lot that's going to be very difficult. I don't think it's a strong case. I mean, it sounds good. I just think it's going to be difficult to prove.
Yeah, and I think the time after he left the party to the time the murder happens matters. What was going on? And where did he get the knife from?
Yep.
That's going to matter too. Hey, Denise, anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, just would love viewers to check into DeniseSchonwald.com, connect with me. I've written many books, lots of podcasts. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, someone just messaged me now, said many health clinics have been shut down over the U.S. It's a huge problem. If I ever become wealthy, I promise I'll open up at least one. We need to help with mental health here. And I'm going to say we were just discussing this. And weren't we just discussing this?
And I will tell you, honestly, I've been practicing for over a dozen years now. Mental health is from what I do, it's pretty straightforward. It's not difficult when you've been doing it for a long time to diagnose. You can come up with a conclusion very quickly on what's going on, the family dynamics and all of that, so that part is, I wouldn't say the easy part, but that part is pretty straightforward. The complexity comes with getting everybody on board and having a willingness and for them to do the work to change. So the first part is easy, or easier. The second part is very difficult. And when we're not in good mental health, it sort of spills over. So it spills over to our spouses, then it spills over to the family, then it spills over to society. So by the time it gets out into society, it's got many layers. And it's really not difficult to see how it originated. It's very difficult, though, to get it to stop once it starts to sort of overflow.
You got me thinking, maybe in closing, one last thing. When you look at Rob Reiner, and there were a lot of times where he looked like he was taking responsibility of his son and all these things, but also responsibility is not guilt. And I think I think if you don't identify that, that's where the person who could be in that, whatever it is, could play into that. So remember, taking responsibility doesn't mean that you take onus of every decision the addict ever made. It's not, responsibility does not mean, in this case, always an admission of guilt. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Let that fit in well. As always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's gonna notify every time I post a video. I also have buy me a cup of coffee. It's in the link in my description, also on top of the YouTube channel. And then I'll wait for Denise to text me later on to see when's the next best schedule for her to discuss the Ashley Buzzard case. She sadly, she just pled not guilty, but there's enough evidence there to know that she took her 9-year-old child from California, eventually to Utah. I think it was October 9th, and she shot the child, 9 years old. Execution style, multiple times in the back of the head. But there's a bit of a story behind her, and I would love to maybe discuss. I think it's called filicide.
Yeah,
I guess when you murder your own.
Yeah.
So I thought maybe we could touch into that a little bit. That is going to be a topic soon. So I thought text me when your next availability is. I'll love to get that.
I'll do my homework.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right, guys. As always, guys, stay safe.